Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dojo Live this August 30th, 2022. My name is Kim Landis, and it's my pleasure to be hosting today. Joining me as co-host is America Guerrero.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you, Charlie.
Yes, and the most important person of today's show is our guest, Charlie Key, who is the CEO and co-founder at Losant. Charlie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, especially because we're talking about IoT today, Internet of Things, and really how that's changing the world, or at least needs to. And before we get into that in depth, we'd like to get to know you a bit more, Charlie. If you could please share your story, your background, what's kind of led up to Losant, your passions, etc. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. My background. Well, I guess through education, I'm an engineer. So I went to school for computer engineering, spent a few years in the software world after coming out of school and just working, called consulting, building software applications, a bunch of random stuff. At the same time, I actually was working with two of my co-founders now in Losant. We have known each other since college. We went to school together, so that's now a little over 20 years ago. So
wow,
we've known each other for a little while. Done a couple companies together, but anyway, we were doing some random stuff kind of outside of our day jobs, looking at starting a business. Fast forward a few years, myself and Brandon, one of my co-founders here, ended up jumping in and building a company called Modulus, which was a software platform company. And we ended up selling that in 2014 to Progress Software, which is a public software company out of the Boston area. So that kind of snowballed a lot of the things that we were trying to do. Got really interested in what was happening in kind of the Internet of Things space as we were coming out of that company, especially when looking at in the industrial world, manufacturing, big companies, starting to see things pop up, and that led us to, okay, what does it look like if we think about the software side of building these solutions? What does that look like? And so, since I guess about 2010 or 2011, I've been on the business side. So I jumped out of the engineering world. They won't let me touch anything anymore. That's long gone, and now I focus on the sales and business development and anything else that happens to fall onto my plate. But it's been a journey, and we started Losant now close to 7 years ago, and pulled in our other founder, Michael, with Brandon and I, and kind of been off and running. So it's been a crazy journey.
You're based on Cincinnati, right?
I'm based out of Cincinnati, yeah, and went to school in Indiana at a small engineering school called Rose-Hulman.
All right, all American. I love it. Perfect. So let's talk a bit more about Losant, the problem that you're solving as a company, and how that relates to IoT.
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, when we started the company, now I guess close to 7 years ago, we were looking at how companies were trying to build IoT products and solutions, and that's a super broad kind of category of solutions.
It is, because honestly, the only thing that comes to mind is like any type of a gadget. This can be mass produced or homemade that does something wirelessly. That's what I think when I think of IoT. I don't know how close I am or how.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have a lot of like the consumer kind of IoT stuff, whether it's a Apple Watch or a Fitbit or your Nest camera at home, and that's a lot of kind of the consumer side of IoT. We don't play much in that world. We play a lot more on the industrial side. So think about a company who wants to monitor its own equipment that's installed out in the field, and it kind of goes on from there. So we were kind of looking at the space and really said, okay, how are companies doing this? What's the software that they're using? How are they building it? Who's building it? Are they doing it themselves? Are they hiring somebody? What's all these kind of challenges that they're having? And we kind of quickly realized there were a couple main themes, and it's kind of driven our company since day one. The first was it's just kind of really hard, expensive, and time consuming to do. It's tough. The second was, the companies that are looking to build and deliver IoT solutions into the market at the enterprise level are not experts in it. They don't have software people in-house. They usually don't understand the hardware. They don't understand the connectivity. It's all of these challenges that they don't have expertise around. It's because their day-to-day business doesn't revolve around IoT. It revolves around something completely different. So, the tools and the software and the platform that we provide has to really revolve around how they think and work. And so, that led us to develop our platform, which is kind of a low to no code platform for building and delivering these enterprise applications. And so, it's really been the focus. We haven't really strayed much from that world and certainly evolved a lot over the time we've been around, but that's been our focus.
That's really cool. The way I imagine this playing out is companies having a wouldn't this be nice idea and this, solution to problems, and yet the hurdle of not knowing how. And so there's just probably this continuous cycle of this like backburnering it. Yes, but, and then, you've got to keep the day-to-day going. And so it just sort of never happens, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely part of it. What we see a ton is companies and enterprises they've got a list of problems, right? They've got any list of problems inside of their business. They've got any list of problems that they're trying to solve for their customers. And so, a lot of times they don't even know that IoT is going to be part of that solution. Really, when we talk about it, IoT is a way to help solve problems. It's a technology, it's a mentality, it's a process inside of your company. It is not going to be the solution, right? It's going to be part of the solution. So, as these companies start with a problem, they want to figure out what that solution is. So, they may or may not know that IoT could be and maybe the best way to help them solve that. And so, part of our goal, one is from education, two is just helping our customers understand where this all fits together and how it comes together. So there's a lot of education up front.
That's exactly what came to mind, which I think is a really good segue into the exact topic that you chose today, which is?
IoT is going to change every industry in the world. Drones picking fruit, predicting carbon emissions, tracking an entire supply chain. The Internet of Things is changing business models. So why is it too hard for enterprises to take advantage of IoT? So please, Charlie, why this question is relevant for today's show? And please tell us why, about how hard it is for the enterprises to take advantage of the IoT.
Yeah, I think we actually came up with a lot of those in this introduction, but
Exactly.
I think what we could do is go deeper, right? It starts with education, then it starts with cost, and it starts also with know-how. Those three things making it hard. Anything else on that list?
Oh, there's also so many. But it becomes back because it's vital as you look at industries around the world. They're all trying to improve their business model, improve efficiency, make more revenue, increase profits. There's a lot of challenges that IoT is going to be part of solving. And that's why I said, it's going to change every industry in the world. It's going to be part of little things here and there that you may or may not know they're happening. They're not involved, but they're impacting the bottom line. They're impacting how a business goes to market. They're impacting how we think about providing value to our internal stakeholders, to our shareholders, to everybody involved. So that's really why it's so important as these companies try to understand how to take advantage of this stuff, right? If we talk about just take carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, making our companies greener, making our businesses more sustainable, those are big, lofty goals, big, lofty challenges that businesses and enterprises are trying to think about. Well, I'd argue that IoT is going to be part of how we solve that, how we understand it, not only from a monitoring and a reporting standpoint, but also how do we operate better as a business to make our company greener, to make it more sustainable. Everything from understanding how much fuel our fleet is using out in the field to understanding where all of our assets are. How are they performing? Are they in need of maintenance? Are they overworking? Are they overheating? What's going on with them? So all of this kind of rolls up into making these companies more sustainable. And so that's just one simple opportunity inside of this overall world, and that's going to touch a lot of companies around the world.
I have a question. In which verticals did you start selling your services?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we started the business, going back a little bit more on my background is, I grew up here in Cincinnati in Ohio. My family has worked in manufacturing for 35 plus years, and looking at a lot of what is happening in this industrial space was a lot of where we thought and how we wanted to start was, how do we help companies who are making things improve how they make it, help them understand what is happening with their machines. And so we still spend a ton of time in the industrial space. Typically, it's actually one level above kind of the factory floor. So if you think about a company who is producing big engines and compressors that they're selling into the market, well, what we work with those companies to do is we help to provide them the software to be able to collect that data from those pieces of machinery out in the field. So we have a little piece of hardware attached to it. It could be anybody's hardware for the most part, but we've got the software running on it. It's pulling in that data as fast as possible, trying to understand what's happening down at what we'll call the edge, and then push that data up into our cloud platform so it can be better analyzed, provide insights on how that equipment is performing, and then provide our customers and their customers with how that equipment is going to perform, whether it's breaking down, when is it going to break down, what's happening with it. Let's report on that so we understand the efficiency over a period of time. So that is kind of where we started, was this in kind of this industrial space. And it still is a big focus of our company today.
Interesting. So your product, is there the hardware component as well, or solely the software component that simply integrates onto other?
For us, we are solely on the software side. Now, we work with a lot of different hardware. So any IoT solution product is going to have hardware involved. Typically, the way we think about it is down here at the bottom, we have some hardware sensors that are creating the data, collecting the data, grabbing that, whatever it is. So in the case of our compressor example, there's the actual compressor creating all of this data. There's sensors on that compressor that's pulling the temperature and pulling how fast it's rotating and maybe the temperature or how much voltage is being used, and then there's a controller on that's making that happen. We'll work with a bunch of hardware providers to put our software right next to that, be able to pull that data directly off of that piece of equipment. And then the next thing you have is you're going to have connectivity, whether that's cellular, that's sending it over a cell. Maybe it's hardwired in, so it's just going back to the network and then hitting the internet through whatever means the enterprise has, or it's going over a LoRa, an LP WAN. There's all kinds of different connectivity. We're less worried about that. But then it comes back into the software layer, which is a big part of where we're spending our time, is in that software layer, and then that delivery of all of that insights and experience back to the customers. So, we're purely focused on the software, but that doesn't mean we don't play with hardware pretty much every day of the week.
Yeah. Like, it's super fun. It sounds like the best of both worlds. When it comes to servicing your software into your users, what's that process like? What's your discovery? How are you making like the best fit and determining what's the data that's going to be useful for them? Like, what does that like customer service side, project management rollout kind of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it comes back to something America said earlier. It's all about the problem. It's all about the problem that the customer is trying to solve. So we start there, right? Like when we sit down with a customer, we want to understand that problem in and out. And whether that problem is they want to create a new product for their customers, or that is we want to improve our efficiency or understanding of this. Well, that's where we start. We're going to sit down with the customer, hopefully at that stage, and they're going to say, all right, here's what we're trying to solve. We've identified that we may need this piece of hardware and we want to send it over cellular. And then, we want to deliver this experience to our customers. Okay, we've got these buckets of things that they know. Maybe they don't know all of those stuff, and we'll help them figure those out. But we're going to sit down, we're going to walk through that. We actually, if they need a lot of help, we'll walk through a process that we call our proof of concept process, where they'll work directly with our team over several weeks to help understand what those requirements have to look like and how they can get delivered as an experience to them and their customers. And so we kind of go through that process with them and help them understand all of those little pieces. Now, a lot of times it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, their problem is they want to understand how much their building's being used. So we want to understand occupancy. All right, we need to count the number of people going in and out of a space. There's a very specific number of ways to do that. Now, it gets a little more complicated there, how much power they want to use, all these other things. But, the idea is sound, and all right, we start there. So, it kind of goes off of there. But then you have customers who have equipment that will produce 300 different variables every half of a second. And you want to help them understand what that data looks like. And so in some of those cases, maybe we bring in an external team to help them understand the data science standpoint. So there's a ton of different components that kind of fall into that bucket. But really for us, it's treating that relationship from the very beginning of understanding what that problem that looks like and what that solution needs to look like in order to solve that. That's what it comes back to.
Wow. And what about updates? Like, okay, we've done it, we've got it, it's all rolling out, and then I need a change.
Yeah.
Or what does that look like? How do you handle that?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different parts of that process. So you think about it down at the hardware level, then you think about it at what we call the edge processing component. So our software helps do a lot of those components in a very simple way, right? Now, if you need to actually change out a sensor, well, you've got to go have somebody actually take it out and put it back in. But
Losant lets you know when that sensor is gonna
hopefully we've already told you. Hopefully we told you before it broke that you need to go change that, and that's going to be the best way for you to accomplish what you're doing. But let's say that the hardware is working. We have something down there collecting that data. You can program that through our software remotely to say, hey, I want to change what this is doing slightly. And that goes back to our kind of drag and drop low code interface that literally our customers can go into, say, oh, I want to make it do this instead of this, push it, it'll go over the air down to the piece of hardware, update the rules that it's running, and then voila, hopefully it continues to work and does exactly what you want. The same goes within the cloud, right? There's always a little bit of minutia in all of this, just because, again, in a real deployment process, you probably want to test it and a couple other things. But the idea is, the same. You're going to make those changes, and the simple to use interface, you deploy it, it deploys it, and that change is live for any number of data and any number of devices kind of pumping through the platform. And so, it's a pretty seamless process. One of the other part of what we knew early on was, yes, you're absolutely going to have to change your stuff. You're probably going to have to change it on a pretty regular basis. And you are going to change the hardware and everything else that sits underneath it. So we've got to be flexible in kind of how we approach that.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I have a question for you related with the education industry. This question is from Antonio Zuna, one of our listeners, and he asks, what type of solution can a company reach in the education industry? Maybe in the campus or in a student information system? Also, go Cincinnati Reds, he says.
Well, I agree with the Go Cincinnati Reds. They're pretty atrocious this year, so we'll hope for a better year next year. That's okay. My understanding is from the question is what are the types of solutions that we can see in kind of the communications, the education industry? Okay. From a campus standpoint, we see a lot of IoT happening at kind of what we call smart environments. Smart environments for us would include a campus, it would include a building, it would include an airport. basically, we talk about it as the core problem typically is I want to understand what's happening with my assets and my resources inside of this space, inside of this building, inside of the campus. Maybe that is understanding occupancy, which is a really big one, especially now, both from the pandemic and understanding this occupancy in general, but also coming out into a more remote understanding of how workforces are working, how people work, how they interact with their spaces. Occupancy is a big one. So we see that a ton of trying to understand how a space is being used, whether that's how many people are in there, what are they at, what are they doing, what resources being used, all the way down to less of a real use case, but what we've seen it is how much coffee is being used in the coffee machines, right? Which comes back to inventory control, inventory management. In a big space across a lot of people, such as maybe a college campus, you might want to know these things at a pretty good level for ordering, inventory management type of questions. So we see a ton of that. The other one on campuses and buildings is going to be around their building management systems, understanding their HVAC systems, their heating and cooling. How are they performing? How am I pulling that data across all of my different spaces, across all of my buildings, across my entire campus to understand maybe greenhouse gas emissions, CO2, all of these components kind of roll up into what we see across a bunch of different solutions that fall into the kind of this educational campus, college world.
This actually makes me think, talking about education and campuses, years ago, I don't know if this is true or if it's just an urban legend, but I had once heard a story about a campus being built and then the engineers purposely not laying out any sidewalks. And then they just naturally went and watched where people are walking, where are these paths being created, and then that's where they decided to pave, which I think makes sense, right? So leads me to my question. A lot of the IoT that we're talking about is, I think, okay, this is where we're at, what's happening. How could this be applied in the discovery phase, before things are actually rolled out or built, but to make, save money and efficiency and other elements before anything is even a reality? Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of that during that discovery phase is one, hopefully we're going to work together with the customer and a partner to understand the size of the problem and the challenge. And so there's a lot of discovery and digging up the understanding of the size and scale of what the customer is trying to do. And so this is going to uncover a lot of, hopefully, the good paths and the bad paths that we're going to go down or not go down. There are cases, sadly, that you get done with that phase and you go, the scale of this is just, it's not going to gain you money. It's not going to save you money. It's not even going to probably make you more efficient. Either we're asking the wrong problem, asking about the wrong problem, or we're thinking about the solution completely incorrect. There's other quick answers in this is we're going to simulate. We're going to try to simulate the environment. We're going to try to simulate what that solution looks like. From a value standpoint, that can be done very quickly in order to understand during that phase. We can test a lot of different things at that point. So that discovery phase is vital, especially in understanding, because some of that components may go into deciding what kind of hardware we're going to use, what kind of connectivity we're going to use, who are the people inside of the organization that have to be part of this overall solution. We haven't even talked about that. That's a whole nother challenge companies have is they don't have the right people working around this stuff to get it solved and get it out in the world and get it to scale. But that's discovery phase becomes a vitally important and maybe a little bit longer than some people want it to be.
For sure. So we're going to come up with it. We're actually headed into the final few minutes of today's show, if you can believe it or not. And we do want to touch on your company culture here in just a minute. But before we do, I do have my final question. And that goes back to the education component and maybe this chicken or the egg. How do you go about approaching this? And number one, IoT is where it's at. It's a necessity. It's the future. And just getting people on board with that idea. And sort of the opposite end of that spectrum, this balance of when is too much or enough too much, or I don't know how to say that. Is there too much IoT that can be happening?
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, thinking about it purely from kind of a go-to-market standpoint, we're spending a lot of time talking to people at conferences. We're spending a lot of time trying to create content, trying to uh, understand the problems companies are trying to solve that fit well with IoT. Again, there can be too much IoT. Absolutely. There's a lot of problems that can be solved simpler, cheaper, and probably are the right way to go. You know, we're trying to make sure from a content standpoint, from an understanding, from an SEO standpoint, all of these components that kind of roll into getting our name and awareness out there, trying to understand what those problems are, and then we have to talk about them, write about them. That's a big part of how we think about it, because a lot of these companies are not searching for IoT platform. They're not asking that question. They're asking the question, how do I understand how many people are in my space? How do I understand the occupancy? How do I understand the efficiency? So, that's a big part of how we kind of think about it, and try to get to where those people are. Events are starting to come back more in person, and that's a big part of how we kind of think about the space. So that's a big part of it.
All right. Well, thank you. So in this final few minutes, let's bring it back to Lucent. This is not your first rodeo, and even with your co-founders. So looking back and the companies you've built and your new adventure, let's talk about some words of wisdom, lessons learned. What do you feel that you guys have definitely gotten right this go around? And what did you learn past go arounds, sort of mistakes that you didn't commit again?
Well, how much time do we have here? We've got plenty of things we've done wrong both times. We've done some things right. I think, for things words of wisdom that I tell people all the time is, when you're looking at starting a company, it's important to understand your role and the other people's roles early on, and trust them to solve those problems that you're trusting them to solve. Even ourselves, when we were working in our previous company, a lot of times we tried to solve problems by committee. Even early on, that's a terrible way to actually get things done and out the door. In this company, we've done a much better job of understanding where our roles are, and understanding what our responsibilities are. We started this company with myself on the business side, Brandon on the product leadership, product management side, and then Michael is our CTO on the engineering side. We think it's really important to separate product definition from product engineering. They have different goals, they have different priorities, and so separating those was a big thing for us, and especially starting this company. So that's a big one. Company culture, thinking about providing. I think of my job as a few different things. One is to make sure that we have money in the bank, right? Hopefully that's coming from customers. as a venture-backed startup, it could come in from investors. But we gotta have money in the bank. If we don't have money in the bank, you're not a real company. So that's number one for me. Number two is make sure we have the right people in the building. So recruiting, understanding where we're lacking or what we need in order to do the job that we're trying to accomplish. That's number two for me. And then number three is, how do I remove the barriers for everybody else to actually get work done? So those are kind of how I think about my job. And that kind of rolls downhill to, giving people in the company autonomy and responsibility to solve problems, and to make a difference in how we do our work day in and day out. And so we try to live by that a lot. The other one is, startups have a ton of smart people. Smart people tend to have some level of ego. It happens. It's fine. We know it. But especially in early companies and early startups, you have to learn to understand where to check that and where to respect how everybody is thinking and how everybody is talking and how everybody is approaching the problems. We've got a lot of smart people. Sometimes that can cause conflict, but some conflict is good as long as it's a good conflict, that's fine. But we have to all understand that everybody's got a little bit of ego in how we approach our world. So that's a big one that we talk a lot about too.
And I like that. Iron sharpens iron, but sparks will fly.
Yes, they will.
For sure. We just don't want the sparks to cause a fire, right?
Right.
Right.
The fire person real bad.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Charlie, for joining us today, for teaching us all about Losant and the problems that you're able to solve with IoT. We wish you and the company nothing but success in the days moving forward. Stick around with us just a moment as we go off air. But before we do, America, what have you got coming up this week?
We have tomorrow a show with Ravi Swaminathan. He is the CEO and founder at TaskHuman. The topic is promoting work-life integration to recruit and retain talent. The question is, how can employers meet shifting employee expectations by supporting work-life integration and overall employee well-being, while also helping business to retain and track talent in today's turbulent workplace environment? It was a long question, a difficult
You got it out okay.
yeah. And then on Thursday, we have another show with Ryan Meyers, head of product at Manifest Climate. The topic is data-driven approaches to climate management at 12 p.m. Pacific, both of the shows.
Thank you. Thank you again, Charlie, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. See you tomorrow.